This is Just Ask Julia, and we are going to be talking about advancing your career by communicating your professional brand. And let's kind of deep dive into it. So when we're talking about your brand, it's really important to know yourself. I know some of these things I'm going to talk about, you're going to be like, well, duh, I kind of know some of that. But here's what Liz and I see when we start working with somebody and we start asking them questions, we realize that sometimes people don't always sort of deep dive into who they are and what they're trying to do. So we want to give you an opportunity to think of, when you're communicating your brand, where that really starts is knowing yourself. So I think of, what is your gravitational pull? What is it that you, when you're making your to-do list in the morning or at the end of the day for the next day, what are you looking forward to doing? I have worked with so many people who are trying to assess what it is that they love to do, because that's part of making sure that they keep doing that. And one of the exercises that I give them is to take a piece of paper, put a line down the middle, and for an entire week, write on the left side, what are those things that you get excited about doing? What is it that when you start getting involved in it, you kind of go down this rabbit hole because you just kind of love working it in whatever way you're working it. And on the right side of that piece of paper, you write down all the things that you kind of dread, you avoid, you procrastinate on. And it can give you some insights into what it is that you what it is that you love to do, and how you should try to prioritize your time, or how you should advocate for yourself at work, or when you're looking for that new job, trying to make sure you're doing more of what's on that left side of the piece of paper. I can tell you personally, I did this when I was in my last corporate job and I was feeling a little itchy. That's what I describe it as. I would get a little itchy, like, hey, I kind of want to move on and do something else, but I don't know what it is. And I did this exercise for myself, and that's how I know that it can really help people, because it gave me some aha moments to realize this is where I want to be. So your gravitational pull is those things that get you excited, where you feel like you are kind of in the zone. Anybody who's been an athlete knows, what being in the zone is. But even if you haven't, you probably have had those moments where you are feeling like everything that you're doing is kind of falling into place. And a lot of that, obviously, at work is when you're doing the kind of work that you love to do. And so we want to make sure that you are clear on that. And I think from there, you're looking at, well, what do I want to be known for? Do I want to be known for these things? And so crafting that and pulling that together is absolutely the first step that you have to take before you can truly advocate for yourself and start communicating who you are and what you do. It's also important to do this because I hear a lot of times I'll ask people, what do they want? And they'll tell me one thing that they want, and followed by 9 things that they don't, from a career standpoint. So I want to do this. What I don't want is I don't want all of these other things. When you are advocating for yourself, whether you were trying to get a promotion, you're trying to get that next project, whether you were trying to interview and get that next job, it is so important to know the list of the things that you want to do and that you're good at and where you feel like you're in the zone. Because when you talk about those things, you light up. And those are the things that are going to help you get towards doing more of that. When you have that list of what you don't want, it's good to know what that list is so that you can try to avoid having that a big part of your job description, but that isn't what you want to talk about. So the next thing I would say is thinking back to when you get some kind of praise, like, what are you known for? When do people come to you? What do people say about you? When do they ask for your input? How are you perceived in whatever your community is, in your team, in the company, in the department, wherever you are? And there's a twofold reason for this. One is it's because it's really good to listen to what they're saying. It is good to know what others say about you, why they come to you, what are you the go-to person for. But the other thing is when you get into an interview process, and an interview process can be internal when you're trying to move up, or when you are going to your your direct supervisor and asking to do more things, you want to remember those things that help you stand out. Because if you get any kind of pushback or any kind of objection, or people kind of, want to hold off on things, you want to have in your back pocket that you are known for something, that people see you as the go-to person for something, and what others are saying about you, because this is a validation and it can help supplement when you're talking about yourself and what you want to do. Taking that further, I think you always want to look at, so what I call your anchors and your pulls, like who relies on you. So when you are advocating for yourself, again, trying to get a promotion, or maybe you're even refreshing your LinkedIn profile and you are putting on there in your about section, or even up in your headline, talking about what you do and who you do it for, you want to think who relies on you. Is it your team? Or is it your customers? Is it your clients? Who are those people out there? And where do you sit inside that organization so that people know, what level you're at? What scope of responsibility do you have? What industries are you serving? Understanding those things that really tie you to something that's going to be valuable to whoever is trying to give you that promotion, or whether you were looking for that other job, or you are trying to, keep your job with all these layoffs. Some people are trying to advocate for themselves to just, keep the position that they have. So know what those anchors are for you. And then lastly, thinking of the distinctions. And this is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. Liz, you might, see that, I'm sure too, especially when you're writing people's resumes and LinkedIn profiles. But what do you do differently? How do you stand out? Not to say that you have to be a unicorn, but it is really advantageous to be able to say, I do this in my own unique way, or you even say that you do it better than somebody else, or that there's something that you're going to be able to bring to the table that others don't do. So you want to know what those distinctions are. How are you going to be able to stand out against the competition? So that's one of the things that we're always talking with people about when you put together your resume and your LinkedIn profile and you go interview. This is predominantly when you go out to another company. You have to think a bit about your competition. And when you're thinking about your competition, it doesn't mean that you have to be competitive to them, but it does mean that you have to think about who are they and how are you going to stand out. So the common interview question, why should I hire you? What makes you the best candidate? How do you compare to the other candidates? Well, you don't know who the other candidates are. But this is an opportunity, and what you're being asked to do when you get asked those questions is to say, what makes you the best person for the job? And so having those distinctions of being able to say, I'm going to be able to hit the ground running faster in this project because I have these skills, being able to sell yourself in that way. So as you're thinking of how do I communicate who I am, what I do, who I do it for, these 4 kind of categories are important elements for you to consider, and pulling that together before you can really articulate those things. So then we think of, where do you want to go? So if you're communicating who you are, what you do, who you want to do it for, I think it's also important to think about what the future holds. So when a lot of people are thinking of how do they capture the essence of themselves, they're thinking of where they are today. The reality is everything's always going to keep changing a little bit. You may not change companies, but the company is always trying to evolve, and there are things that you're going to be involved in. And I think it's important to think of where is it that you see yourself in maybe 1 year or 2 years or 5 years. So I think considering where you are now, thinking of what is your next, and then what is even your next. So from a career standpoint, it is very smart to think of where you might want to be 2 jobs from now. Doesn't mean that you have to be ready for that today, but what is kind of the game plan on that? So the list here I have on the left of more responsibility. Are you looking for more responsibility? Are you looking for new challenges? Do you want to learn or get exposure to new things? Do you not have management experience? Have you not led a team or had direct reports? Do you need to have that in order to get to that next role that you might want? Do you need leadership opportunities? Now, leadership is not the same as management, and I want to make that distinction because this is something that I think a lot of people lump together. They're not the same. You can be a leader without being a manager of people. You don't have to have a team. You don't have to have direct reports. You don't even have to have indirect reports. A leader is really how you show up, but a leader can also be that, that person who is seen as someone who is an expert. A leader is someone who is taking initiative. A leader is someone who is helping others move along as well as, trying to help themselves. And it could even be, being on some kind of a committee. So a lot of companies have sort of task forces. You might want to be on a task force. You might just want more exposure throughout the whole organization. But thinking of where you want to go and what you're going to need to get you there is going to be important. If you want to make more money and you are looking at what's going on in the market and how do I get to a role that's going to have this kind of an income, you have to think of what are the steps on the path that are going to get you there. Now, some people, their life changes a little bit and they need something a little different. You might need a little bit more flexibility right now. There are people who are finding that when their kids are young, when they're first-time parents, when they've got kids first going into school, or if you have aging parents or other family things, you might need some greater flexibility. And so even from a career standpoint and thinking of your next and your next, you might be thinking, how do I make that shift from where I am now into a role that is going to give me some of that greater flexibility? And a lot of times when you're making that shift, it's not that single step, it can be a double step. So you want to be clear on what that goal is. And by the way, that doesn't mean that can't change at some point. If something changes in your life, it changes. That's okay. You can sort of reassess what this list looks like, but those are some of the things you might want. Now, mentor or guide, here's an interesting thing. A lot of people think that in your career, having a mentor when you're early on, I think people sort of assume that happens, that you get a good boss or you get in part of a mentorship program. I can't tell you how many times I work with somebody at the VP level or even at the C-suite level who says, the hard part about being at this level is that there seems like there's so much stake at play that I don't have somebody that I can talk to. That's why executive coaching has become such a big thing. But in companies, a lot of times, even executives want to have a mentor, want to have somebody that they can learn from. So many of you know I work with a lot of people in the finance world because that's what I came from. And I have had a lot of people who are VP controller, VP finance, who say they get into a position and the CFO that they're reporting to isn't somebody who is helping them advance their career. It's a CFO who maybe came up a different track and doesn't really know what they do. And so when they're looking for that next role, or they're looking for how do they advance their career, they say, I need somebody who is above me or has some kind of experience that will help me launch or advance my career. So that mentor and guide is not designed necessarily for somebody who's kind of early in that first 10 to 15 years of their career. Even the top people want somebody who's going to help them move along. So advocating for yourself, though, is really kind of where it comes into play. I love the image of the peacock. I know that, I don't know if you've all seen peacocks. I went to Kauai a few years ago and went to this nature reserve, and there were all these peacocks. And I'd never been in person seen peacocks flash their feathers, and it is spectacular. But I think what is important to think from an imagery standpoint is that a peacock is saying, hey, look at me. Now, we all know that the male peacock has all the color and the female peacock is brown. The brown is spectacular too. And I would put up a picture of that if I could have found one. But the peacock is an important image because in order to communicate who you are, you have to be willing to sort of put yourself out there a little bit. And if you want to advance your career, you gotta kind of take some of those steps. So what are some of the key things that you have to do? You have to let people know what you want. So very interestingly, I do a lot of different workshops, and when I'm working with managers, I'm surprised by how many managers tell me that somebody left because they wanted to do something and they had no idea that that person wanted to do that. So there seems to be a disconnect inside companies where managers and their teams are not talking about where do you want to take your career and what do you want to do. And I think we look to managers and say, well, you should be asking me that. You should be having in our monthly or quarterly or annual meetings, you should be asking, where do I want to go? But the fact is, managers aren't always doing that. They may not be comfortable with that. They may be afraid of the answer, which is, I think, why it doesn't get asked sometimes. But for you, you have to tell people. You have to let people know. You have to tell your manager, you know, I'm here's what I'm doing and I enjoy doing this. But when I look at my career, this is where I want to go. This is what I want to do. This is what I'd like to be to get more exposure to. This is the type of project that I'd like to learn from. Here's where I feel like I have a gap in my background. If you let them know what you want, you are more likely to get assigned to those projects. You're more likely to have an opportunity to partner with other people in other departments, to learn whatever it is that you want to learn or get exposure to what you want, and to do that internally. So think of who do you need to tell and let them know what it is that you want to do next, so that you are getting exposure to that, so that you are advancing your career. And getting that exposure, you know, gives you more options. And I also think it's advantageous to do that internally in your company when you can. I realize some people won't have that opportunity, but when you can learn those things internally, it's really helpful, because when you go out and you interview, you can talk about how you took initiative to do new things, that you got exposed to new projects. And oftentimes when you do that in your current job and you then go and interview for another job, you can usually get more responsibility, maybe more income, because you've already done that. I think a lot of people look at changing jobs to sometimes get the experience that they want. And they don't always realize that sometimes they could have gotten that experience where they are, but they needed to advocate for themselves. So step up and do that. Request new opportunities. Raise your hand. You know, I've had a number of people that I've worked with that I smile, because their tactic for advancing their career was to really listen to what nobody else wanted to do. And to say, if nobody else wants to do this, I'm going to do it. I'm going to learn something new. I'm going to be the hero. It's going to give me some great stories. So sometimes, not every time, but sometimes raising your hand to do what others don't want to do can really set you apart in your career. So if that works for you, you might want to try that out. When you're advocating for yourself and trying to move forward, another thing to keep in mind is that it's not all about you. It's also about the other people around you. And making sure that you are taken into consideration and advocating for others can show that leadership presence in you. I love the phrase, high tides raise all ships. And so if you are raising the tide for everybody else and you're kind of bringing them with you, it makes a big difference in your career. So make sure that you are helping others strive and succeed and move forward. When people want to get a promotion, that's one of the first things that people look for, that the executives look for. how much do you impact the people around you? It's not just about you standing out and doing your thing, it's the other people too. I would also say, and sort of the second half of this list is about kind of looking up and looking around and preparing yourself for these other opportunities. Know what's going on in the market. We can be a resource for what's going on in the market. There are, if you look at the Muse, which is a site that has a weekly, I think it's a weekly newsletter. The Muse is good. LinkedIn has a lot of great information they put out. Know what's going on in the market, who's moving around, which companies are growing, which companies are struggling, knowing what compensation is out in the market. You know that there are a lot of different states that are putting in compensation rules and laws about what you can ask and what you can ask. But there's also a lot more transparency coming out. So for example, in California, starting this month, and I think New York as well, so January 2023, companies have to disclose what the compensation is for a job. And I think Colorado has that as well. So you're going to start seeing in job descriptions on LinkedIn and Indeed and those other sites, and probably even on company websites, where the salary ranges are posted. So if you are thinking of making some kind of a change, do a little research project, figure out what the compensation looks like, look at the job description, understand the job descriptions, what are they looking for, and then look at the compensation as well and get a good sense for what the market is. Because when you're advocating for yourself, and maybe you want to ask for a raise, or maybe you want to move into another role, and they're saying, well, we're going to give you more responsibility, but we're not going to pay you more. There's a lot to be said for saying, well, I want to take on this additional responsibility, but I also want to be compensated more. And I know that the market bears that because I've done my research and I've seen that other companies are paying in this kind of range for that scope of responsibility. So know what the market is. You might need to seek out educational opportunities, which might mean take a class. It might mean going to a conference or a symposium or something else that helps you learn something that isn't part of your regular job. And then making sure your resume and your LinkedIn profile are up to date and keeping them kind of fresh. I think every quarter, go look at your resume, plunk in another bullet that says, here's what I worked on, so that you remember some of that data and that information. Look at what you want to add to your LinkedIn profile. Keep those things fresh. I had a conversation with an executive yesterday who said she's probably, I'm going to say close to 50, and she said when she reaches out to recruiters or she applies to anything online, although at her level there isn't a lot online, but she said, I don't get a call back. When I try to push myself out there, I don't get a call back. But she said, I get people inquiries from people from my LinkedIn. So one of the biggest shifts we've seen in the market is, yes, you want to have a resume ready to go because you're going to need that if you get involved in an application process or an interview process. But your LinkedIn profile is being used more by recruiters more than oftentimes their applicant tracking system and other sources. So they are searching for people on LinkedIn. So making sure that LinkedIn profile is built out is really important. And just a little sidebar for those of you who don't know, we started, I don't remember how many months ago it was, but we started a resume review service and a LinkedIn review service. You can see it if you go back to the website, to that same area where you sign up for Just Ask Julia. You'll see LinkedIn and resume review. If you just want to get some feedback and insights on how prepared are you, what do you need, that might be a really good resource for you. If you aren't looking to have a full rewrite, you might want to check out those services. And lastly, one thing that people really overlook is engaging in informal interviews. If you are interested in making some kind of a change or learning something new, go find people outside of your it could be inside your organization or outside your organization, and go talk to them. Hey, what do you need and what do you look for when you are trying to hire somebody into this area? What would I need to get my skills to a place where you would want to consider me? And as you're pulling all of this together, and I'm going to sort of jump back to like LinkedIn, make sure that what you do and who you do it for and why you do it, that you're capturing those things in your headline and your about section, specifically in LinkedIn, so that when people look at you, they're getting the essence for who you are. That's probably one of the biggest differences that we've seen in LinkedIn in the last few years, is the shift from kind of talking third person about what you do to a first person storytelling. Let me give you, an inside, look into who I am and what you would get if you and I were to work together. So you want to make sure that those things are fresh, thinking of all the concepts that we've talked about. And lastly, sometimes you got to go for it, whatever it is that you're doing. But when you go for it, make sure that you are clear on what you're talking about. So be very specific in your messaging, whether it's on your resume, your LinkedIn, when you're advocating for yourself, when you're asking for that project. Be specific. Don't skirt around it. I know a lot of people try to sort of soft touch their way into it. Be specific about what it is that you want, and know the point that you are trying to make, or what you are trying to ask for. And so importantly, don't apologize and say, I don't want to rock the boat here, but I'm trying to do some other things. You've got to show that confidence in what it is that you want to do. Share your successes, meaning know what your stories are. Remember when we looked back and we were talking about sort of the accolades, what do people say about you? When do you get recognized? Know what those successes are, know your stories. And so importantly, tap down your inner critic. If you are sort of doubting yourself, make sure that you have a conversation with that inner critic each day, and keep it kind of at bay, because confidence is what it's all about. So anyway, I hope this has helped. We're going to open it up for questions, so we can stop the recording here, Liz.